Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida Fair Tax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, October 18th, 2024. Trump's tax plan will be fine. That's the title of an article by Nathan Lewis, written for Forbes magazine. Here are some of the points he makes. The Great Depression got started with the passage of the Smoot-Hawley tariff in the United States by the Republican Party, which immediately set off a cascade of retaliatory tariffs worldwide. Now, this alone did not cause the Great Depression, but it did cause the initial downturn. This was followed by a long string of bad decisions in reaction to that downturn, such as Republican Herbert Hoover's 1932 tax increase, which took the top income tax rates from 25 to 63%. Now, tariffs are taxes, basically a variant of sales taxes. Trump has floated the idea of eliminating the income tax altogether and replacing it with tariffs as a revenue source. This was actually the regular state of affairs in the United States before the 16th Amendment was ratified in 1913. Before then, there was no income tax. Trump is testing the waters for a much more important reform, eliminating the federal income tax altogether, both individual and corporate, including the full repeal of the 16th Amendment, and replacing it all with a VAT, or a value-added tax, with a rate of about 15%. Now, this resembles the fair tax, national sales tax proposal popular among conservatives, but this would be much better in my view. In the 19th century, the United States had high tariffs, domestic excise taxes, sales taxes, and no income tax, and it was the most successful country in that century. In conclusion, Mr. Lewis is not alone in believing that former President Trump is looking to eliminate the income tax and go to a consumption tax. Governor Walz, the Democrat nominee for vice president, said in his debate with Senator Vance that former President Trump is going to enact a 20% consumption tax. Now, Mr. Lewis is correct in believing that replacing the income tax would be a good thing, but he goes off the rails in thinking that a value-added tax would be the ideal replacement. He's also wrong about a VAT and the fair tax being similar in nature. Now, they're both consumption taxes, but there are major differences in how they're structured, implemented, and enforced. Mr. Lewis points out that the value-added tax is a tax used by all our trading partners and provides them a great advantage in competing with U.S. products and U.S. exports, as discussed in previous chairman's reports. However, he makes the assertion that retail sales taxes of more than 10% are difficult to collect without citing any evidence for this. Now, Mr. Lewis may not know that 90% of U.S. retail sales are made by companies like Amazon, Walmart, and Target. These ultra-large retailers represent less than 10% of the total number of U.S. retailers, and because of their computerized accounting systems, there is no possibility to evade any sales taxes imposed on their sales. Now, Mr. Lewis doesn't address the fact that the evasion rate with a VAT ranges from 4 to 40%. Compare that with the experience of most states who see a 2 to 4% sales tax evasion rate. Mr. Lewis fails to state that a VAT would require 100% of U.S. businesses, sole proprietors, all corporations, and all limited liability companies to file VAT returns. By comparison, only retail businesses, about 10% of total U.S. businesses, would be required to collect and remit the fair tax. Also, Mr. Lewis is only addressing the replacement of the individual and corporate income tax. His proposal would leave the federal payroll taxes that fund Social Security and Medicare intact. Now, these are the most regressive federal taxes on the books. They are imposed on every dollar a worker earns, and low-income earners pay the same rate as high-income earners. The fair tax eliminates these regressive taxes and ensures the future solvency of Social Security and Medicare. The answer is not a value-added tax, but the fair tax. The fair tax is so simple that everyone can understand and comply with it without having to hire expensive professional help. And individuals will not need to file any tax forms at all with the IRS because there will be no IRS. The fair tax shows the true cost of the federal government on every retail receipt, so all of us can understand how much we're paying in federal taxes and determine if the benefits we're receiving are worth the cost. The fair tax helps U.S. companies compete with foreign competitors and not be required to move overseas to stay in business. It keeps jobs in the U.S. rather than exporting them to other countries, permanently establishes the solvency of Social Security and Medicare, eliminates special treatment for any group of taxpayers, and the fair tax benefits lower income groups more than the present income payroll tax system does, and it is fair. The fair tax eliminates the need to file tax returns, and as mentioned earlier, it eliminates the need for the Internal Revenue Service. The fair tax allows each of us, not the elites and their minions in D.C., to determine the amount of federal tax we pay. And the fair tax is the largest transfer of power from D.C. to the people since the Constitution was adopted. The American people will overwhelmingly support the fair tax if they're given the chance, and all of us will benefit if it's enacted. The solution? Pass the fair tax. Now, why would D.C. pass the fair tax and give up an almost unlimited source of donations? Well, they won't, at least not voluntarily. The only way they will is if the rest of us demand it. Isn't it time to end this ludicrous tax collection system in the IRS along with it? There's going to be a vote on the fair tax in the House of Representatives. We have the opportunity now to force all members of the House to show where they stand. They can vote for the present income payroll tax system, or they can vote for the fair tax. They can support the corrupt income tax in the IRS, or they can vote to eliminate it. It can't be any simpler than that. They can hide the true cost of their government, or pass the fair tax and show everyone the true cost of government on every retail receipt. And finally, they can support the largest transfer of power from government to the people, the fair tax, or they can vote against it. Now, if members think the fair tax needs to be amended to address a problem, they can propose the change. Don't let them get away with rejecting the entire bill because it has a perceived flaw that can be easily addressed, and if it's a real flaw, corrected in the final bill. And don't think for an instant there aren't any flaws in the income tax. Help us bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. Now, if you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to fairtax.org to invest in AFFT and help us pass the fair tax. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org.